At a luxurious auction, a humble man challenges the elite and does the unthinkable, leaving everyone shocked. But what seemed like just a bold bid quickly turns into a revelation that would change the life of a powerful businesswoman. What really happened between Ethan and Victoria that no one could have predicted? And how did a hidden secret come to light, turning the tables in a surprising way? The sun was slowly setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the calm sea that stretched beyond the mansion. The mansion, a symbol of wealth and power, stood tall on the edge of the California coast, with large windows and a mix of classic and modern architecture. Inside, the elite of Los Angeles gathered for what would be the event of the year, a charity auction with the promise of raising millions for charitable institutions. Elegantly dressed men and women strolled among the sculptures and art pieces on display, champagne glasses in hand and smiles hiding ambitions and judgments. Among the guests, Victoria Hale stood out. Her name was synonymous with success in the real estate industry. She had built an empire with her coldness, ambition, and, above all, her ability to ignore everything she considered inferior. Victoria, tall, blonde, dressed in powerful attire, seemed to dominate the room as if everything around her was an extension of her property. Her critical gaze swept the room, evaluating the attendees not by their character, but by their bank accounts and status. As the auction continued, with bids in the millions for exclusive art and properties, a man entered almost unnoticed. Ethan Ramirez, in a simple suit, without the extravagant adornments of the others. Of Latino descent, with a calm and humble demeanor, he walked through the halls like a fish out of water, ignored by most, except for a few glances of curiosity or disdain. Ethan, however, seemed indifferent to those looks. When the jewel of the night was announced, an oceanfront mansion valued in the millions, the bids started to rise quickly. Victoria, of course, was one of the favorites. The property was a trophy she wanted to add to her personal portfolio, another piece to solidify her image of invincibility. But among the elite bids, an unexpected voice cut through the room. "30 million, Ethan said, with a firmness that contrasted with his modest appearance. The room fell silent for a brief moment, and all eyes turned to him, including Victoria's. Her eyes narrowed, filled with disbelief and disdain. Who was this man to dare compete with her? 35 million, Victoria said, with a confident smile, certain that her bid would intimidate him. 40 million, Ethan replied without hesitation. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Who was he? Nobody knew. The tension between the two grew, and Victoria, irritated, decided to take it as a personal challenge. 50 million. 55, Ethan said calmly. Rage consumed Victoria. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who clearly didn't belong in her world. She stepped forward, glaring at Ethan with eyes as sharp as a blade. I don't know who you think you are, she whispered, but you're clearly in the wrong place. People like you don't last long here. Ethan didn't look away. He knew this was only the beginning of the night. Victoria, in a calculated move, turned to the crowd and, with a sharp smile, said loud enough for everyone to hear, I admire the audacity, but let's be realistic. Some of us are here through merit and hard work. Others, well, they're trying to stand out in places where they clearly don't belong. The room laughed. Ethan, however, remained unfazed. He knew that this environment was steeped in prejudice and judgment, and that his humble, quiet presence was an uncomfortable reminder that not everyone there was untouchable. He took a deep breath, holding Victoria's gaze, but before he could respond, The auctioneer announced the winner. Ladies and gentlemen, the winning bid of $55 million goes to Ethan Ramirez. Silence fell over the room. Victoria froze, unable to believe what had just happened. How had this seemingly insignificant man managed to outbid her? Who was he, after all? The murmurs grew again among the guests, this time filled with tones of surprise and confusion. Victoria, however, was not willing to accept defeat. With determined steps, she approached Ethan, looking him up and down with disdain. "Who do you think you are?" she asked, her voice a deadly whisper, audible only to him. "Do you think you can just show up here, make outrageous bids, and walk away unscathed?" Ethan looked at her calmly. "I'm someone who values what lies beyond appearances, Victoria." The response, unexpected and full of hidden meaning, left Victoria even more furious. She was used to controlling every situation, and at that moment, the loss wasn't just the property, but her position of power over him. The auction continued, but the tension between the two was palpable. The elites present observed with curiosity and a morbid pleasure as the confrontation unfolded. Oliver Shaw, an experienced lawyer and longtime friend of Ethan, noticed the growing discomfort and approached, gently pulling Ethan's arm. "You're playing with fire, Ethan. Why don't we just leave?" Oliver whispered. "These people, they can destroy you." Ethan gave a slight smile. "They don't know who they're dealing with, Oliver. Trust me, I've got a plan." Oliver frowned, but he knew Ethan well enough to know that once he'd made up his mind, there was no changing it. Even so, a sense of unease was growing in his chest. "I know there's something bigger here, but I hope you know what you're doing." Ethan patted his friend on the shoulder and turned his attention back to the event, while Victoria watched from a distance, unable to hide her fury and determination to learn more about the man who had dared to challenge her. The atmosphere at the auction, once sophisticated and calm, was now heavy with tension. Victoria, always composed, felt uneasy, as if she were losing control of the situation. The guests had resumed their conversations, but curious eyes still lingered on Ethan and Victoria, waiting for the next move in this unfolding conflict. As the auction neared its end, Victoria approached a small group of familiar investors, her longtime allies. Her voice was soft, but her tone betrayed her irritation. "This Ethan, does anyone know who he is? Where did he come from? I've never heard of him in our circle." One of the men beside her, a chubby and influential businessman, whispered, "Rumor has it he's some kind of investor, but no one seems to know any details. He's not on our level, that much I'm sure of." Victoria pressed her lips together, her mind racing with the thought that a stranger had publicly managed to challenge her. It didn't take long for her to make a decision. In a sudden move, Victoria crossed the room and stopped in front of Ethan, drawing the attention of everyone present. She stood tall, but her eyes, glowing with fury, did not hide her true intentions. In a loud voice, she addressed him, making sure everyone around could hear. "Mr. Ramirez," she began, her tone dripping with venom and condescension, "I couldn't help but notice your boldness. It's not every day we see someone like you trying to get involved in our investments. But tell me, how exactly do you expect to honor such an exorbitant bid? Perhaps you're used to smaller stakes, but this is a game for adults." Victoria's words sliced through the air like sharp blades. A wave of nervous laughter and whispers rippled through the room. Ethan, however, remained unfazed. His eyes met Victoria's, and for a moment there was a heavy, almost tangible silence. Everyone waited for his response. Ethan stepped forward, his expression calm, but now with a firmness no one had noticed before. "You speak of stakes, Victoria, but sometimes the biggest bets are made by those who don't need to flaunt their power. They understand the true value of things, even when others fail to see it." Ethan's words were delivered with such serenity that for a second, Victoria hesitated. But her arrogance wouldn't allow her to back down. Oh, please. Do you really think you can fool us with that speech? Everyone here knows exactly where each person belongs. And you? Well, maybe you still have time to find your place before you lose yourself. At that moment, Oliver, who had been watching from afar, sensed that the situation was spiraling out of control. He quickly approached, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Let's go, Ethan. This has gone too far. You don't need this. Let's leave before things get worse." Ethan looked at his friend, and then back at Victoria, realizing that the night still held revelations that would change the entire scene forever. He knew he was walking a fine line, but the truth he carried needed to be revealed at the right moment. With a slight smile on his face, Ethan stepped back a little, nodding respectfully to Victoria, as if to end the confrontation there. "Maybe you're right, Victoria. Each of us must find our place. But a person's value isn't just in appearances or the money they flaunt." Victoria laughed, but her laugh was cold, devoid of joy. "We'll see how long you stay standing, Ethan. We'll see." As Ethan walked away with Oliver by his side, the atmosphere in the mansion was electrified. Everyone knew that something much deeper was happening, something far beyond a simple auction. The auction was nearing its end. The most anticipated item of the night, the multi-million-dollar property that Ethan had won, was still on everyone's lips. Meanwhile, Victoria was talking with her allies, plotting ways to reverse the outcome and seek revenge for the affront. However, when the auctioneer formally announced Ethan's victory and asked him to come on stage to receive the papers, a new silence fell over the room. All eyes once again turned toward him. Ethan, with a calm demeanor, stood up and walked to the stage. By this point, Oliver was restless. He knew Ethan well enough to sense that something big was about to happen, but he wasn't sure what exactly. Ethan took the microphone, his eyes scanning the room. "Tonight has undoubtedly been memorable," he began, his voice clear and controlled. "And I'd like to take this moment to reveal something that many of you may not know." Victoria, watching from a distance, crossed her arms impatiently. She was waiting for some kind of admission of defeat, something to satisfy her. But what happened next left her in shock. "I didn't come here just to buy a property," Ethan continued. "In fact, I already own many properties, and some of them, interestingly enough, are directly tied to Hale real estate." Victoria turned pale. Ethan's words echoed through the hall like thunder. "For many years," he went on, "I've invested in various companies, some more publicly, others more discreetly. What few know is that I am one of the largest investors in Hale Real Estate, a company I've long admired from a distance." The murmurs grew louder. Victoria was frozen, unable to react. Ethan turned directly to Victoria, his tone calm, but now with a firmness no one dared to question. "I'm a partner in your company, Victoria. And more than that, I have a significant stake in your largest properties." The room fell into a deathly silence. Victoria, always so sure of herself, looked as if she were about to crumble. Ethan had done the unthinkable. He had revealed his true identity, showing that, despite his humble origins, he held a position of power that Victoria had never imagined. With one last look at the crowd, Ethan concluded, "Appearances can be deceiving. And perhaps it's time we rethink how we judge the people around us." He handed the microphone back to the auctioneer and walked off the stage, leaving a stunned room behind him. The night had ended in a way that no one could have predicted. The silence in the mansion, once filled with laughter and cheerful conversations, was now heavy and dense. Victoria had been unmasked in front of everyone, and for the first time, she felt vulnerable. As the guests slowly left, still murmuring about the unexpected turn of events, Victoria remained frozen, her thoughts spinning around what had just happened. Ethan, on the other hand, was leaving the mansion accompanied by Oliver, who was still stunned by everything he had witnessed. "I knew you had something in mind, but this went beyond anything I imagined," said Oliver as they walked toward Ethan's car, parked a little further away from the mansion. Ethan sighed, his expression calm, but his eyes reflected a mix of emotions. Sometimes the only way to expose the truth is by waiting for the right moment. I knew that confronting Victoria publicly would be the only way to make her and the others realize the error of their judgments. But you know this won't end here, right? She won't let it slide, Oliver warned. Ethan nodded in agreement. I know. She'll try something, it's in her nature. But the thing is, now she knows who I am, and that changes the game. As the two got into the car, Ethan couldn't help but think about the next step. As much as his revelation had been a direct blow to Victoria's pride, he knew there was more at stake than just public humiliation. There was something deeper, a choice he would have to make. The next day, Victoria did what she always did when confronted. She reacted with all her might. Using her connections, she tried to find out more about Ethan, his history, his businesses, in an attempt to find something that could discredit him or, at least, make him marginalized by influential circles. She couldn't accept the fact that someone she considered inferior had managed to bring her down publicly. However, after hours of research and phone calls, Victoria found something unexpected. There was no scandal surrounding Ethan. On the contrary, his businesses were legitimate. His trajectory as an investor was impeccable, and more than that, he was known for his philanthropic work, helping many Latin communities and other marginalized groups to rise economically. This new knowledge left her in a whirlwind of emotions. The woman who had always believed that power was a matter of money and status now found herself confronted by someone who had earned respect not only through material acquisitions, but through character. And that troubled her deeply. Days later, Victoria made a decision. She would arrange a meeting with Ethan, not out of genuine interest in correcting her mistakes, but because she knew that, at that moment, he was her only chance to avoid a bigger fall. The public humiliation still weighed on her shoulders, and if there was someone who could reverse that situation, it was him. Victoria approached Ethan's secretary, scheduling a meeting in a discreet office, away from the media's gaze and business colleagues. When the day arrived, she entered the room with a forced smile, but still maintaining her proud posture. Ethan was already there, sitting behind a simple yet welcoming desk, his hands folded in a gesture of patience. "Thank you for seeing me, Ethan," she began, her voice controlled. "I believe we had a misunderstanding at the auction. I know we're both business people, and perhaps we can find a way to resolve this." Ethan, without showing surprise, observed Victoria carefully. He could see in her eyes not a genuine apology, but a desperate attempt to save her reputation. "Victoria," he began slowly, "this isn't just about business. What happened at the auction was a reflection of something bigger. It's not just about money or power. It's about how we treat others, about the respect we offer or fail to offer." She crossed her arms, uncomfortable with Ethan's moral tone, but remained silent. She knew she couldn't afford to offend him. "I'm not here to humiliate you again," Ethan continued, "but I need you to understand why all this happened. Throughout your life, you've built walls around yourself, walls that push people away and blind you to the needs and struggles of others. And I was one of those people." Victoria felt a pang in her chest, but didn't let it show. "I grew up knowing what it was like to be judged for how I look, not for who I am. You, however, have always been at the top, judging and dismissing those you consider inferior. But now you're in a position where you need help. And my question is, are you ready to change?" For a moment, Victoria's pride made her want to stand up and leave the room. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something different. A discomfort that didn't come from humiliation, but from a painful realization. She knew Ethan was right, but admitting it to him, and to herself, was an internal battle she had never faced before. She hesitated, her voice softer now. "I don't know how to answer that, Ethan." He leaned slightly forward, his eyes full of empathy, but also firmness. "Then I'll give you some time to think. But remember, the path you choose now may determine the rest of your life. And I'm not talking about business. I'm talking about who you really want to be." Victoria remained silent for a few moments, absorbing those words. She knew the choice was before her, and that for the first time, the power of decision wasn't based on money or status, but on something much deeper. Victoria left Ethan's office, her mind swirling with a mix of emotions she rarely allowed herself to feel. Wounded pride, frustration, and a subtle yet disturbing sense of regret. Over the following days, these emotions continued to torment her, an internal battle between her arrogant nature and the realization that perhaps she wasn't invincible after all. Meanwhile, Ethan was facing his own dilemma. He knew that Victoria had come to him out of self-interest, not genuine remorse, yet a part of him couldn't help but wonder if she deserved a second chance. That night, sitting in his simple yet cozy home, Ethan reflected on the power of forgiveness. He had always believed that above all, respect and human dignity should guide his decisions, but he knew that showing compassion to someone who had belittled him would be a true test of his values. Oliver visited him that evening. "So, what are you going to do now?" he asked as the two sat on Ethan's small porch, looking out at the city lights in the distance. Ethan let out a long sigh. "Honestly, I'm still thinking." She asked for help, but I'm not sure if it was out of remorse or fear of losing what she has. Oliver shrugged. "It's definitely more of the latter. People like Victoria don't change that easily. She's used to the world revolving around her. Now that she realizes you could take her down, she's trying to salvage what's left of her reputation." "I know," Ethan replied, his tone reflective. "But what I'm trying to figure out is if that really matters. Even if her motivation is selfish, maybe I can still use this opportunity to show her there's another way. I've always believed that no one is beyond redemption." Oliver chuckled softly. "That's you, Ethan. Always trying to see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it." Ethan smiled back, but inside, he felt the weight of his decision. The power now in his hands could be used for revenge or redemption. He could crush Victoria, showing her what happens to those who treat others with disdain, or he could extend a hand and perhaps help her become a better person. The next morning, Victoria received a call from Ethan, asking to meet again. This time, the meeting would take place in a neutral location, far from the luxuries and pressures of the elite. Ethan chose a small cafe in a simpler part of town, a place he frequented when he needed clarity and perspective. Victoria arrived with her usual firm posture, but her eyes betrayed the insecurity that now accompanied her. She was still confused by her own emotions, and the situation forced her to confront a part of herself she preferred to ignore. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed completely at peace, sitting at the table with a coffee in front of him. "Thank you for meeting me again," she said, attempting to sound courteous. Ethan made a simple gesture, inviting her to sit. "Victoria, before anything else, I want to make it clear that my intention here is not to humiliate you. I've thought a lot since our last conversation, and I believe there's a chance for us to find a better path." Victoria felt a tightening in her chest, as if she were being pushed toward a crossroads she didn't want to face. "I recognize that I've made mistakes," she said, her voice softer than before. "But I don't know if I'm ready to admit that I was entirely wrong. I've always done what I thought was necessary to get where I am." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding her words. "I get that you built your empire with a lot of dedication. But the problem isn't what you've achieved. It's what you've lost along the way. Sometimes the price of success is higher than we realize. And what I'm offering here isn't punishment, but a chance to reconsider what truly matters." Victoria looked at him, her eyes tired from fighting the emotions she had suppressed for so long. "And what do you expect from me in return?" she asked, with a mix of distrust and vulnerability. Ethan took a deep breath before answering. "Respect. If we're going to work together, it will be based on mutual respect. I don't expect you to change overnight, but I want you to at least consider the possibility that not everyone below you is inferior. If we can build something together, maybe we can change more than just our own lives." Victoria remained silent for a long moment, processing his words. She knew that the decision she made in that moment would define not only her future, but also her own identity. Could she really set aside her pride and accept that there was something to learn from someone she had so recently despised? Finally, she nodded slowly, her words almost a whisper. "I accept. I'll try." Ethan gave a gentle smile, full of understanding. "That's all I ask." Months had passed since that day at the cafe, and gradually, the change in Victoria began to show. It wasn't easy, nor was it quick. The arrogance and pride she had carried for so many years didn't disappear overnight. However, the partnership with Ethan forced her to see the world from a new perspective. Now, instead of treating those around her with disdain, she began to listen. Ethan involved her in several philanthropic projects, many of which helped marginalized communities. At first, Victoria participated cynically, still thinking that it was just a way to clean up her image. But over time, something inside her began to change. She started to understand the stories of the people she was helping, to recognize their struggles, and to see her own limitations. Business meetings, once dominated by her coldness, became more collaborative. The woman who once viewed the world as a chessboard where she moved the pieces began to see the value of cooperation and empathy. Ethan, for his part, maintained his firm but always patient demeanor. He knew that Victoria's transformation would be gradual, but he recognized the small steps she was taking. More than anything, he was pleased to see that little by little, she was reflecting on her actions and understanding the impact she had on those around her. At one of these philanthropic meetings, Victoria, now more humble and open, took the floor. "I used to believe that success was measured only by what we achieved," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "But what I've learned over the past few months is that true value lies in the connections we make and the positive impact we leave on people's lives." The audience applauded, but Victoria was no longer interested in the applause as she once was. What mattered now was what she had learned and what more she could do to help others. The hall was packed that night. It was a charity event, like many others Ethan had attended over the years, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Soft lights reflected off the marble walls as people moved through the space, exchanging smiles and pleasant conversations. At the center of the stage, a podium awaited the closing speech of the evening, which would be delivered by none other than Ethan Ramirez. He stood at the back, observing everything. His journey to that point had been long, marked by challenges and moments when he almost gave up. But as he looked around, he could see how each choice, each action had led him to this moment. The room was full of people he had helped in some way, directly or indirectly, and this gave him a sense of fulfillment that money could never provide. Victoria was present, now a different woman from the one he had faced at the auction months before. She was conversing with some guests, her posture less rigid, and her face carried a touch of humility that had not existed before. Since their first confrontation, she had changed, not completely, as no one changes that quickly, but enough for those around her to notice. When the event organizer called him to the stage, Ethan took a deep breath. The lights bathed him as he climbed the stairs, and the gentle applause of the guests echoed through the hall. He looked out at the crowd, composed of powerful figures, philanthropists, investors, but also of ordinary people, beneficiaries of the projects to which he had dedicated himself over the years. When he reached the podium, he adjusted the microphone and, for a moment, remained silent, letting the anticipation build. Then, with the calmness that had become his trademark, he began to speak. "When I was a child," he said, his voice firm but full of emotion, "my father taught me a lesson that at the time I didn't fully understand. He used to say that people will always show you who they are, not through their words, but through their actions. Growing up, I learned those lessons the hard way." The audience was fully attentive, wrapped in the aura of sincerity that emanated from Ethan's words. "I grew up in a community where we were often invisible to those in power. No matter how hard we worked, no matter how much we tried, there was always a barrier, always someone telling us we didn't belong in certain places. But what those people didn't know is that the value of a human being can never be measured by appearance, bank account, or background." Ethan paused briefly, allowing his words to resonate through the hall. He looked at the faces in the crowd, some of which reflected the impact of his message. Throughout my life, I've realized that the biggest mistake we can make is underestimating the people around us. We all carry within us the potential to change the world, whether through small acts of kindness or great gestures of courage. And true wealth lies in recognizing that in others. His eyes turned to Victoria, who watched him with an expression of respect and perhaps gratitude. He smiled slightly before continuing. A while ago, I was in a situation where I was underestimated, where I was told, directly or indirectly, that I didn't belong in a certain place. But I knew that my strength wasn't in proving something to others, but in staying true to my own values, and in believing that respect and empathy can take us further than pride and arrogance. The audience applauded softly, but Ethan raised his hand, asking for silence. He wasn't finished yet. Today, I'm not here just to talk about my achievements, but to highlight something that we can all do, regardless of our position in life. We can choose how we treat people. We can choose to see beyond appearances and extend a hand to those whom the world may have ignored. I truly believe that our greatest responsibility as human beings is to recognize the hidden value in people. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the emotion in his words. He knew that everyone in the room was listening, and more importantly, reflecting on their own actions and judgments. If I've learned anything from this journey, it's that the power to change the world begins with a simple choice. The choice to treat others with dignity, with respect, and with the belief that we all have something to offer. And when we make that choice, we discover that true value doesn't lie in our possessions, but in our relationships. Because, in the end, that's what defines us. Louder applause erupted through the hall. People stood in recognition of words that resonated not just as a speech, but as an appeal to humanity. Ethan smiled, satisfied but humble. He knew that his journey didn't end there. The work would continue, the lessons would be passed on. And if even one person in that room changed their view of the world, he would consider his mission accomplished. As he stepped down from the stage, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning, he found Victoria. Her eyes were different, softer, more vulnerable. "Thank you," she said, with a sincere smile, "for showing me what I couldn't see before." Ethan smiled back with an understanding look. "We're all still learning, Victoria. All of us." She nodded, and they both stood in silence for a moment, sharing a genuine connection built not through money or power, but through mutual respect and the recognition that, behind appearances, everyone has value.